You're probably familiar with the stereotype, the lazy abuser half asleep on his couch. In his book, Understanding Marijuana, Dr. Mitch Earlywine explained, laboratory studies of humans and primates show little support for amotivational syndrome. School performance does not vary with cannabis consumption in college students. No studies show the pervasive lethargy, dysphoria, and apathy that initial reports suggested should appear in all heavy users. Of course, there are lazy people who use marijuana, just as there are lazy people who eat a lot of food or watch a lot of television. But consider a recent study that says nearly 100 million Americans have used or tried marijuana. If marijuana really leads to amotivational syndrome, where is the epidemic of American laziness? This has been your 2-Minute Truth. There is no evidence that marijuana makes you lazy or causes any structural brain damage.
Welcome back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics. I'm Buford Terrell. I'm with Bindu Nair tonight. We were talking before the break about communicating with local elected officials and letting them know what's going on. And that reminded me that I had been talking to Clayton Jones, who has done an outstanding job this past year of staying in touch with many members of the Texas legislature, talking to them about some of the marijuana issues. And he's told me two things. First, as the session ended with no action taken on any of the marijuana legislation, he talked to some of the legislators after the session, and they told him that as near as they could tell, these issues weren't of any concern to anyone because they had not heard a word about them from any of their constituents. If you want action taken, you've got to do the acting to begin with. The other thing that Clayton has told me over the past few months is how to communicate effectively with your representatives. And the funny thing is, in this day of electronic marvels, where you're all Twittering, when you're all texting, when you've all got your iPhones and IM, the communication that seems to amount the most to the guy in Austin is a handwritten letter on real paper mailed through the Postal Service with a real stamp.
Right. I guess the only thing better than that is actually if you can go visit them,
well,
especially when they're on break in their district office.
I would, after some of the things that I've heard, I would put the in-person visit as maybe number 2. And it's simply because that when a matter actually is scheduled for debate in a committee or scheduled to come up for a vote, the typical legislator will ask his staff to gather together what they have heard from constituents
over the last year.
Yeah, and then they look at how big the pile is.
Right.
So if you've got a letter in the pile, that counts for more even than a personal visit. If your handwriting is bad as mine, yes, certainly print the letter out and put it in an envelope and mail it. Beyond that, I would say a phone call, the personal visit ahead of the phone call, and unfortunately for most of us, email is probably at the very bottom of the list.
Right.
It's the lazy way, it's the easy way, and it has some effect, but it's not the best way.
Right. I mean, unfortunately, there is so much technology that you can just press a button and send out mass emails.
Yeah.
So I think that's why they don't look at them as much. But the handwritten letter definitely, it's what we used to do back in the day. So.
Yes, and as I say, it makes a more impressive stack when it's time to count. So.
Right.
But communication with your representatives are important. You're their boss, but they don't know what to do until you tell them.
Right. You know, the interesting thing is when it came time for putting the medical marijuana affirmative defense bill on the ballot, or not on the ballot, that was far removed from that, unfortunately, but putting it up for committee and actually being able to be heard in the committee, they said that they had more calls that day for that particular bill than most of the legislators had heard on any other bill in the entire year. So they're out there, but we just, we have to know the right avenues and we have to know the right ways to kind of get people involved. The Texas Coalition for Compassion, I think it's TCC or 3 Cs, I know Steve Benson is heading it. He is kind of picking up the role from Texans for Medical Marijuana. And he's doing a great job. He has a lot of great ideas for keeping people involved throughout the year as opposed to just during
I believe
sessions.
He's in Dallas, isn't he?
Yes, exactly. So it looks like we have a caller.
Okay.
Hi, welcome to Drugs, Crime, and Politics.
Hello, Bindu.
Hey, Dean, how are you?
This is Dean. Yeah, I'm calling in to touch base with you guys. It's been a few weeks. I apologize for missing a couple of times, but there's a lot happening in the drug reform arena these days, don't you think?
Definitely.
I think so, yeah.
There was a meeting today at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Did y'all get a chance to talk about that?
No.
A little bit. This is what I was referring to, that the Tom Angel from LEAP got to ask a question of the drug czar.
Yeah.
Right, and, I've been after Gil Kerlikowske since the day he took office, calling his headquarters there at ONDCP, trying to invite him on my radio show. After the 4th week, I was leaving 1 call per week, I finally got a call back from his assistant and said, tell us about the nature of your programming. What kind of questions would you ask? And I said, well, I think the first question would be, can you name the #1 success of the drug war? And she immediately says, well, he's going to be traveling for several months. and I told her, don't cut me off. I want to talk to you. I hope you'll relay this to Mr. Kerlikowske, that this drug war is crumbling. It is an issue whose time has come. More and more people are beginning to realize that. And I think he should go talk to President Obama and change their perspective, their slant on this, and get on the right side of this issue, because it's going to fall down hard on some people. And I would prefer that they do it the right way. In our efforts on the Drug Truth Network radio shows, we've had some good success of late. We had this past Sunday on the Century of Lies show, Mr. Alan Clear. He's the director of the Harm Reduction Coalition. And he was headed to Geneva to attend a UN conference over there on, and again, it was represented in the discussion today with the UN and the U.S. drug czar that it's time to talk about decriminalization. It's time to talk about some of these, quote, incremental measures that are having success around this world. And that's why Mr. Clear went over to Geneva, was to talk to the UN about harm reduction and ways of mitigating the harms of the drug prohibition. Nobody wants kids doing drugs. Nobody wants these things, causing turmoil. But the fact of the matter is, we have given ourselves a shot in the foot about every day, and it seems that we would catch on at some point. Today I had the editor of Foreign Policy magazine. His name is Moises Nayam.
Yes,
he federal former director with the World Bank and very much involved in the peace effort.
He had a very good column in Foreign Affairs a couple of weeks ago on this issue.
Yes, sir, and he has written several books in this regard. He's had many guests on within foreign policy, and they're even producing videos with the likes of Ethan Nadelman and others that see the fallacy of this policy. I also had a quick interview at the end of the show with Norm Stamper, former police chief of Seattle. Norm was just getting out of the hospital, but I'm proud of the fact he wanted to come on my show just the same. And he's a former police chief of Seattle, as is our now current drug czar, Gil Kerlikowske. He had some flattering things to say about Gil and some doubts and trepidation.